tax, and so we have a pretty quick deadline that we have to meet in order to make sure that these bills are treated appropriately at the appropriation committee. So what I'd like to do is, given that we have Senator Lewis who's here, why don't we start? Yes, let's start with Senator Lewis, and then we have a couple other members who had signed up, but if they don't show up, we'll go, there's two other senators. But if the committee will turn your attention to Senator Lewis's
1058.
Senate Bill 1058 at the end of the agenda.
And there may be,
Good morning.
there's a substitute.
I believe there is. So, clerk, our council will hand out the substitute.
Thank you, sir.
This is a bill that is similar to a bill that you might have seen before, that I introduced. But the substitute does a few things that are different. So if you have the substitute properly before us, I'd like a motion to accept that. So good.
Motion accepts up.
Second. So, all in favor of accepting the substitute, say aye.
Aye.
No opposed, no. Senator Lewis, you have the substitute in front of us.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, this is, as the chairman indicated, this is a familiar bill as he carried the earlier version of this on this side. And substitute narrows the scope of the bill, reduces the fiscal impact, and also incorporates some feedback that we got from the tax department. You all may recall from previous testimony, Virginia makes it very difficult for a company to change its filing status to consolidated. 97% of these companies file separate returns. The remaining 3% are pretty large and complex entities. Filing consolidated is a strategic move that they made. The main source of revenue the Commonwealth derives from the banks is the bank franchise tax, not the corporate income tax. However, as a result of the tax conformity at the federal level and our conformity bill, many Virginia banks may have a corporate income tax liability on top of their bank franchise tax obligation. So in some cases, two identical companies may have vastly different tax situations simply due to the filing status. So what we've done is provide in this bill a 2-year window where banks may elect to switch to consolidated status. To do this, a bank must have filed for the same way for the previous 20 years, and in the first and second years after switching, they must calculate their taxes in the old and new ways of filing and pay the higher of the two. And they can't change back for another 20 years, so this is a pretty long-term business decision on their part. So 20 years is a long time, and no other state has a 20-year lock-in period. This bill passed the Senate unanimously, is funded in the Senate budget, and has no potential revenue impact until 2022 because of the safety valve requiring the payment of the higher tax for 2 years. So that is the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Just a quick question procedurally. You mentioned that this passed the Senate unanimously, but we have a substitute in front of us.
The substitute lessens the fiscal impact, yeah.
So the substitute is not the language that came out of the Senate, right?
No, that's correct.
So whatever we take on this, obviously, we need to bounce back and forth a
Right.
couple times. All right, any questions from the members of the subcommittee on this bill? It's a narrower version of the bill that we had considered.
Move to
with the
report
Secretary.
substitute.
Oh, well, that's, no, we already accepted this one. Any comments from the audience, members of the public?
Mr. Chairman, Stephen Dooley from Capital One, we do support the bill as does the Virginia Bankers Association.
Anybody else in support of Senate Bill 1058? Anybody in opposition to Senate Bill 1058? If not, we're back to the motion that Delegate Scott made, which is the motion to report the substitute, with the substitute. Second. All in favor say aye. Oh, no, actually, let's go to the board. Senate Bill 1058.
It's already had a vote up there.
I'm gonna discard that.
Okay, let's start again.
She's
Good.
voting for us.
Thank
Thank you.
That we know.
Let me try that again.
It's a Monday morning. The machine is
Okay.
there we go. So,
Did I break you?
everybody who wishes to vote, we have, we need a quorum, there we go. So, clerk will close the roll. Senate Bill 1058 with, substitute reports on the vote of 6-0. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
And,
Thank you.
We'll work with you throughout this process. Thank you. So, the next member I have on the queue is, Senator Bell.
Ayala,
I don't see
just in
Senator
case you
Bell.
don't remember the name.
Senator Hager?
Ayala, Senator Ayala, just remember that.
Okay,
when
so
my
Senator
phone-
Hager had signed up, so we'll have him go, and then the two senators who are in the room. Senator Hager?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have Senate Bill 590.
All right, folks, if you take a look at Senate Bill 590. Senator Hager.
Okay, this addresses advanced recycling. We currently have a recycling purchase equipment tax credit, which was set to expire this year. This bill will extend that credit through 2025, but it also introduces the concept of advanced recycling. And as the bill was introduced, it was a fairly aggressive one, but this would retain it at 20%. There's a definition of advanced recycling in the bill. It also makes this type of processing categorized as manufacturing, so it would be exempt from sales tax, and also separates it out for local taxation, so that it would be a separate category of taxation for local taxation. And that is it. You'll find the definition in the substitute on line 22 through 26, the definition of advanced recycling, which there are companies now that are getting into that, converts waste materials into new materials for resale by processing and breaking down into their raw constituents.
Thank you, Senator Hanger. Any questions from the members of the subcommittee to start with? I know we have some folks.
Yes.
Yeah, Delegate Ayala.
I was just trying to pull up does it have a fiscal impact, sir? I don't
The,
have those in front of me.
Yeah,
Oh,
you have a hard copy from me.
thank you, sorry.
I understand that it does not, because it started after 2021, correct?
Yes,
It's
so
still-
there's a question from Delegate Ayala was whether there was a fiscal impact, Senator. Do you have
Yes.
an answer to that?
Okay, no budget
Yes,
amendment.
There's not a known one at this point in time, obviously, if anyone engages. The current credit has been used minimally. This is a relatively new concept. There are industries that are interested in the whole idea behind it is to encourage this type of recycling.
Yeah, so my understanding is that based on the impact statement, that because it starts after the 2021 tax year, there wouldn't be any fiscal impact this year. So if there was a motion, that we don't need to refer this back to appropriations, this goes straight to the floor. Anyway,
Mr. Chair?
yes,
Okay, go
Delegate
ahead.
Ayala.
I will let you go ahead and go through your process, sorry about that.
Sure, I understand there's some members of the audience who'd like to speak, first in favor of Senate Bill 590.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Jeff Smith, representing Virginia Manufacturers Association, and we do endorse and support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else in the audience?
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Rob Shin with the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries. We have a lot of small and mid-sized companies that take advantage of this to keep waste out of landfills. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm Mike Carlin, and I'm representing the American Chemistry Council. Very much want to attract the advanced manufacturing businesses to Virginia. I think this will help reduce plastic in the waste stream, and it will allow us to make new products out of products that have been discarded. So we very much hope it will pass this.
Thank you. Yes,
Question.
Delegate Ayala.
You mentioned at the end of your statement, it will help reduce, the tax incentives will help reduce. Could you give me an example of how that will work?
So, right now, we don't have an advanced manufacturing facility in Virginia. We're trying to attract, by adding that category to this section of the code, we're trying to attract them. Essentially what happens is it's a relatively new concept where you are taking a product, say a milk jug, plastic milk jug, and through a closed process, changing it to a gas and then a liquid, and then back to a solid, and you can make it virtually into anything, plastic. So a milk jug can become a pair of eyeglass
Sort of like
frames.
what DuPont does in other states.
There are other facilities in
Yes.
other states, but we don't have any in Virginia, so we're hoping to be able to attract some of those facilities here.
Okay.
Very good.
It's weird, I know that, but anyway.
Okay, good. Is there anybody in opposition to Senate Bill 590? If not, we're back to the subcommittee for any actions. And this one, because we just clarified that there is no fiscal impact, there was a motion to
Technical.
report.
Move the report.
But there is a technical amendment, we have to report with amendment to
We have
approve.
technical amendment? I don't
It
remember.
says right here, a technical amendment, yes. On
Council, was there a
page
technical amendment?
I didn't see one.
I didn't see it.
It says am I looking at the wrong bill?
Uh,
So I know it's,
Delegate,
no.
I think you're looking at the fiscal impact statement, but it's not what's in front of us. What's in front of us is the bill and any amendments, but there is no technical amendment. The fiscal, just as a information, the fiscal impact statements prepared by the planning and budget folks, sometimes they'll write things that say there may be a technical amendment necessary. There's just a lot of suggestions that they make, but whether a sponsor does that or not is up to that sponsor. There is one here.
Again, move the report.
Second.
So the motion is properly to report
And refer.
590 and second it, and the clerk will open the roll.
One more copy, we'll get it together.
Everybody has voted?
big copy you got there.
Don't
Then
judge
the
me.
clerk will
Do
close
not
the roll.
copy Shane.
Senate Bill 590
I didn't
reports
get
a
to
vote
vote.
of 8, sorry. Well,
I did it.
did you want?
Three
Well,
times
it
as
harder.
much for me.
Can we come here in order? We can clarify this. You're in the room, so we can take care of this, okay? So, Senate Bill 590 reports on the vote of 8-0. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
I second it.
So we will now go to, I believe Senator Donovan. Senator Donovan walked in a little before Senator Newman, so, are you sure?
Yes, sir.
Well, I'll leave.
hopefully mine will be
Yeah,
quick.
Senator Donovan, well, let's go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have Senate Bill 1012 before me now, and this just refers to the G3 initiative that the governor has funded. Basically, when tuition is granted, it is tax-free, but the stipends that we'll be granting in G3 will not be tax-free unless we make some code changes now. And it is not yet attributed to revenue, so there's not actually any impact going forward because this money has not been attributed. It's just a matter of making sure that those students don't have their stipends taxed in the unusual circumstance where they have enough income in that year to tax them.
Now, for members, Senate Bill 1012 is not a measure that we've seen in the House, and it's a fairly new concept because the G3 program, that 3G, I guess, program it is. This is a program that the governor just announced recently. Before we turn to the patron, I wonder if I can just ask Tax, just on the, we do have a Senate clause as well. Just Tax, if you have any opinions about whether this does have an impact or not, just so that we can clarify. If anybody would like to speak to this.
Mount Lee, Virginia Department of Taxation. We determined that about 19.9 million of the stipends would be potentially subject to taxation, but we think there'll be something less than that. It just depends on who gets the stipends. If some of these folks might be below the filing threshold and things of that nature. So we think it'll be something less than that, but.
Any questions from the subcommittees on Senate Bill 1012?
Mr. Chairman.
Sure, Doug.
Historically, in the House, we have not accepted the clause.
That's right.
So is that policy, is that gonna have continuity?
To Doug, where I believe that's our underlying goal is to make sure that whatever is funded, whatever is not funded, we don't condition it on that.
Yeah.
But for something like this, because I wanted to hear from the tax to make sure that there wasn't any impact, I don't think that the clause would be necessary,
Okay.
both on substance and process on this particular measure.
Very good.
So when we get to that stage, we'll remove the clause. But if there are no other questions from the subcommittee, why don't we turn to the members of the public? Anybody speaking in favor of Senate Bill 1012? Nobody. Anybody speaking against Senate Bill 1012? If not, the measure is back before us, and as I Delaware correctly pointed out, the Senate has added a provision which we call the clause, which essentially says that this will run effect if there's adequate funding. Doug and Scott?
If we did refer as it is as a language in with the clause, then it would go back to appropriations, correct? We would refer to appropriations.
I would tell the delegate that regardless of whether the clause is in this measure or not, because even though this doesn't have a fiscal impact, because this is a case of first impression for us, and because of the G3 program is the governor's initiative, I believe there is some funding that the governor is looking at. So we want to make sure we line this up with that.
So no matter what we
Yes, so
refer to
I think that
appropriations.
a proper motion would be to remove the clause from here, and then when we get to the underlying measure, then it would be reported.
move.
Second.
Okay, so this would be to strike the Senate clause. And all in favor to striking the Senate clause, say aye.
Aye.
Vote, and the clause is removed, and now the underlying measure, Senate Bill 1012.
Move the report and refer to appropriations.
Thank you.
Second.
Delegate.
But, so, at the same time, we're saying that this is assumed in the governor's budget.
Actually, I should clarify about that.
Mr. Chairman, this is not revenue that is counted yet in revenue. And so I think it was the governor's intent that we not tax these students that we're trying to help get an education and get into the economy And so I think it's really just kind of a technical, adaptation to what was planned with G3 so that we don't put any undue financial burden on those students. So that's why we were a little confused in the Senate as well, because it's not money that is calculated in revenue yet, as it hasn't been dispersed, and therefore there's no actual impact. It's more theoretical than anything else.
Sure, Delia Byron.
So you just said the student would not be taxed. Isn't this, if somebody gives I'm reading the impact unless the impact is not correct. Isn't this if someone gives financial assistance, they can take the income tax off, subtract that from their income on their taxes?
I believe this is state awarded stipends for the G3 program. There's both tuition included as well as some stipend funding in the governor's funding of G3, so that students would have money for books and some other expenses that are sometimes obstacles to them getting a degree. So it would be money from the state.
So money would go from the individual to the state to award to the.
No, the money goes from the state to the student, and what we're trying to do is make sure that student doesn't end up paying taxes on the stipend the state gives them.
That's interesting.
Let's get back to Delegate Byron. She still had the floor. She had a follow-up question.
Well, just clarification, that didn't answer the question properly. So it says the bill would provide an individual income tax subtraction for any financial assistance, regardless of the purpose for which it's spent, received by a student. So it doesn't say the student gets it, it says the person that's giving the money, gets the deduction.
Right.
Is that what it is? And I'm just looking for clarification.
This is intended to address.
I think tax knows.
Very good, that'd be very helpful.
Let's turn back to tax again, because I guess the question earlier was just on the fiscal impact, but do you want to tell us a little bit about how this is designed to be implemented?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, Matt Helene, Department of Taxation. Delegate Byron, it would be for the actual student who receives the financial assistance. They would then be able to subtract the amount that may be taxable for federal income tax purposes on their Virginia return. That's the intent of this, I believe.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator.
Just to follow up, if you look at line 203 of the bill, it says it's not any money that's given to the student from any source. It's money that's received by a student through Get Skilled, Get a Job, and Give Back. So it's specified to this program, which is coming from the state.
Which, so just back to
Which gets back to
Delegate
my
Ware,
question,
yes.
since that is the circumstance and it's state funding, I'm not sure I understand why it needs to go to appropriations. That's why I was wondering about that second step.
And I would agree, Delegate Ware. I think the only reason that I would feel a little bit comfortable about it is because the governor's program is initiated through the appropriations process in his budget as introduced. I
Okay.
just want to make sure that that language that creates the G3 program is matched up with ours, even if there's no fiscal impact. I just would feel a little bit more comfortable making sure that all the language is in the same place, so when the budget is, obviously comes out very soon on the floor.
If I could.
Yes,
And
Delegate Ware,
my
yes.
take on it is, while many of the students will have a threshold that's too low for filing, the fact is that if it were above that for any reason, there would be tax revenue on it, and therefore we've always honored the look of appropriations on whether or not that reduction of potential revenue is something that they want to look at.
Thank you.
Yeah, so, yeah, on this measure, because it didn't come through the House earlier, I understand that many of us are still trying to grapple with this idea, because it's a fairly new idea that the governor has initiated. So I think, just to make sure that all of us are on the same page, I think setting this up to appropriation so that everybody's working on this issue from all angles to come together. I'm very confident we'll see this vote again very soon on the floor, but I think for now, just to move things along, I believe there was a motion, I think the motion was seconded. So those that wish to vote, will go to the electronic voting machine.
Mr. Scott?
Delegate Scott's machine still working?
Oh.
No, it's not.
Uh-huh.
Oh, now it's not.
Mine is,
Oh, no, yours is
How would you
working.
like to vote?
Okay, well,
How
I
would you
gave the
There it
vote.
is.
There it is. So,
Okay, there it is.
so the clerk will close the roll. Senate Bill 1012 is,
How many years, right?
Oh, wait, that's right. Removing the caution.
Right, right.
So we didn't add it, we took out something. Would be reported and referred to appropriations on voted 9-0. And Doug, I appreciate you being diligent about our committee here having independence. Once in a while, it's purely a policy decision. So that makes sense. All right, we are now back to, I know Senator Newman, hopefully, there he is. Senator Newman is here with Senate Bill 735.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, you have seen a bill of this nature in the Senate. This was an item that had some of those that are interested in ride share and some of the individuals that were in the car rental industry in disagreement. The good news is that as a result of a couple of your patrons, Delegate Jones, Delegate Sickles, also Senator Cosgrove, and my bill, we have brought them all together, and now there's agreement. The agreement looks much like this. First, the peer-to-peer will finally be regulated. Number two, we will have insurance on these people. Right now, they generally are going without insurance because they think their personal insurance is taking care of it. Also, it does ensure that none of the platforms or anyone could have more than 10 vehicles. I think there were some people who own car dealerships that were concerned about how many could flood in, that type of thing. This stops that. This does take the tax to 6.5% the first year, 7% in the second year. Mr. Chairman, just a brief one, because I know you understand the general idea of the bill. It does indicate that basically if you're putting a $30,000 car on the system, you will pay $2,100 in tax today, whereas if you are a car rental operation, you pay no tax except for the 10%. So the Commonwealth of Virginia will gain more money from this. We will get the regulation, and they will ensure that we have insurance. When this has come through the Senate Finance Committee, we talked about the fiscal, and because of the way we have handled it, tax can speak for themselves, but we believe that the fees will cover all the setup costs. So we think that it's neutral. We'll see if anyone else thinks otherwise, Mr. Chairman. But that is what the compromise does. I appreciate Delegate Sickles and Jones and Cosgrove working on this compromise.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Any questions from the members of the subcommittee?
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Delegate.
So, without this bill, they can't do this. There is no mechanism, yes or no?
Well, they're doing it today a lot, right? But they're not being regulated at all. So your question is there any mechanism to regulate them? You're right, no. Are they doing it today? Much like before we told Uber how they had to do it, they were doing it. This will regulate an industry that's occurring today. Yeah.
Thank you.
Delegate Scott.
I guess the question I had about both the bills, because I think Delegate Jones and Delegate Sickles both had compelling presentations to us. And so you said this bill is the compromise bill between all parties.
That's right. You'll hear in just a second that everyone who you may have heard opposed or support, everyone, to my knowledge, everyone's here to support today.
Okay. And so your bill is in the format that it should be right now, taking in all of these compromises.
Everyone's compromise is here, and we've kind of agreed to no amendments. Certainly, if your subcommittee decides to change that, you could.
Okay.
But we also added a provision at the last. It was on the floor. That was the last thing I knew about. That said that if you had an entity, for instance, maybe Ford Motor Company, that wanted to have 10 cars, that they couldn't set up subsidiaries and have 100 cars because of that. So it is limited in a hard way to 10.
Senator Newman, our chair has a question.
Thank you. Senator Newman, sorry I was distracted if you've already covered this. Is there any loss of rental fees from what are being collected currently to any of the streams where these rental fees go?
It's a good question. I think the answer is no, and here's why. We believe that this activity is going on today and will continue to go on whether or not we pass this bill. And so we believe that the revenues that will come in, by and large, will be new revenues to the Commonwealth. When we put the provision of the limiting 10, you stopped really what I think was the biggest problem with the bill, which was maybe some car rental company, just some small company would convert their entire fleet to this and go under this model. That was where the hole could potentially come in a budget. We've eliminated that possibility because you can't have more than 10.
And if Mr. Chairman, if I could have a follow-up with tax as to how they see all these moving pieces, I would appreciate it.
Morning, Joe Mayer with the Department of Taxation. I agree with everything that's been said. This activity is not being taxed right now. This summer we checked, there's 75 individuals registered for the motor vehicle rental tax. We're pretty sure that more than 75 people are engaged in this activity. So this would be considered new money, I guess, and it's good that we're going to recover these fees.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have heard the two House versions of this extensively, neither of which survived the appropriations process, but this bill has come out of the Senate, and so my understanding based on the conversations is that this is something that has been worked out. Delegate Scott is in terms of public.
Last question, procedural. Do we need to report, if we do move this out after we hear everybody, they have to go back to appropriations, and both bills ended up going to appropriations anyway, even though I hear that there's possible positive revenue, and we still need to take this to appropriations?
Yeah, this,
If I may.
Chair Watts.
As I have talked with the chairman of appropriations, and that's why we're meeting this way with this on our docket, is we have to get everything that could possibly have an appropriations impact, plus or minus, so the appropriations can review it before the conference committee completes its work on the budget.
Okay.
Our absolute deadline is Friday. Our deadline for our committee will be Wednesday's full committee.
Okay.
Yeah. And today, most of the bills here does have some kind of a budget, a fiscal impact, whether it's positive or negative. And out of the abundance of caution, because the appropriations process is moving pretty quickly, we thought we would just err on the side of making sure that our folks who spent the weekend working on the budget has just one last look at these bills. But we do expect that a lot of these will come to the floor pretty soon. Let's turn to the members of the public. Dr. Ayala.
I have a question for tax. It says that the fiscal impact is $510,000 for the first year. Could you tell me, in this particular legislation, if it were to go forward, how do we recoup that? Like, that's.
Those are programming costs for
Okay.
our systems.
Okay.
And we have treated this as a new tax, a separate new tax, and I would hope that we would get those down, and they would be, we already have this authority with the motor vehicle rental
Okay.
tax, and so if we have to do programming changes, we take it from there.
Is this additional to your?
Yeah, this
current
would be
cost?
additional, because the motor vehicle rental tax is pretty much in place and going, and we already have an item in the budget to cover any costs we incur with that, and we would look to reduce those costs from what they are.
Mr. Chairman, also, this is on the original bill, and it's been substantially increased, but tax is
Yeah.
correct. They will recover them all, but it's substantially less than the introduced bill.
So these are some of the reasons why we just wanted to double, triple check everything with appropriations. So any members of the public wishing to speak in favor of this bill?
Thank you.
Ms. Brown.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Nicole Brenner on behalf of General Motors and Maven, want to thank the patron for his extensive work on this bill, and note that we are reviewing the compromise, and all parties may have a couple of small tweaks before y'all have this in full committee and send it out to appropriations, but want to thank the patron for his extensive work in bringing all the parties together to this consensus.
So you're no longer opposed to that version? You good?
We
Keeping the
support
val-
this bill.
Okay. I was waiting on those.
We support this
That was-
bill.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Magic words.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Clark Lewis representing Enterprise Rental Car. We also support the bill. Appreciate the senator for bringing us all together and working out this legislation. Thank you very much.
All right, anybody else in support?
Chris Legato from the American Property Casualty Insurance Association, and we are very much in support of this bill.
Thank you.
Tommy Lucas with the Virginia Auto Dealers Association. We appreciate working with everybody and the patrons work on this. More support of the compromise. Thank you.
All right.
Good morning, Lisa Guthrie with the Virginia Transit Association. We support the compromise. The transportation funding that was in question before has been assured, so we now support the compromise.
Thank you, Ms. Guthrie.
Chris McDonald, Virginia Association of Counties. I'll just echo the remarks that have already been made that we support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Danny Plucker, Virginians for High Speed Rail. We also support the compromise.
Thank you.
Patrick Cushing on behalf of the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority. We have Dulles Reagan Airports. There's an important language in the bill that covers the regulations for airports, and so we're happy to work with the patron and all the members and support the bill. Thanks.
Okay, Anybody else, who would like to be heard on this, both for or against? And if not, yeah, the motion would be the properly
Move report and refer to appropriations.
Okay, thank you, Scott, thank you. Let's open the board, motion to report and refer to appropriations. All members have cast the vote? Close the roll, and the motion is successful on 9-0. Senator, we certainly appreciate your time and the effort that you put into making this into a compromise for everybody.
Thank Delegate Sickles and Delegate Jones, they did great job.
Okay. I'm gonna go in the order of senators that I saw walk in. I believe, Senator Bell came in first, and then between the two, you had arm wrestle. Senator Bell.
Hi, how are you?
We miss you. No.
Let me just say I miss everybody.
Oh, that's okay.
This is a fairly simple bill. This is actually an administration bill, and the Trump administration came to the governor's staff and brought this point up, and it really seeks to protect a small but very important population. And this is veterans who are permanently disabled, totally and permanently disabled, 100% service-connected disability ratings. And currently they have loan forgiveness. It's automatic by the U.S. federal government, but with the tax changes due to the federal tax law that we conform to, there's a loophole. And this closes that loophole basically and makes sure that there's certainty provided to these veterans, because the current Federal Tax Cuts and Job Act will expire in 2026, and this fixes this beyond that. There is no fiscal impact because we do not collect taxes from these veterans on these types of loans. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Senator Bell. Any questions from the subcommittee? There was no House version, so we're seeing this for the first time. No question? Let's make sure that we hear from the public and from tax department. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to speak in favor?
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Secretary Hopkins. Administration supports this bill. Request the passage of all page.
Thank you. Anybody speak against or have other comments about this bill? Look back to the motion. There was a motion to report, and there was a seconded. If we can open the roll on Senate Bill 745.
I just wanted the HUD.
I'm here to say
The Senate Bill 745 report on the vote of 9-0. Thank you, Senator Bell. Thank you, administration. And we're going to go with
This is the quickest
Senator Reeves.
finance.
Are you up next? Okay. Senator Reeves is up on. He has Senate Bill 500.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a pretty simple bill. Many of you have children and been asked by your kids' teachers, or at least told by your kids' teachers, how much they spend in their classroom each and every year, above and beyond what the school reimburses them for. So this is a tax credit bill that there's already a federal system in place to allow teachers to take advantage of a federal tax credit, but we thought if we can't give them hard money, at least we can give those teachers that are motivated, that want to continue to work in their classrooms and make it an encouraging environment, the opportunity to get a little something back. So this is actually a fund that's set account, a tax credit that's set apart. It's limited to $1 million, so it's kind of first come, first served. There's a $70,000 a year amount that's out each and every year, and that's to fund one additional person at the Department of Taxation to take care of that. And there's a very similar bill, not quite having to do with tax credit. I think it's House Bill 1091 that would provide individual income tax subtraction for income received from full-time employment. I'm not sure whose bill that is in the House, but it's similar but not the same. And, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, that's the bill.
All right. Any questions to Senator Reeves on Senate Bill 500?
We do have the clause on ours. Sure. We put a clause on everything.
Don't worry about it. We'll get to it.
We'll take it off.
Any questions? If not, can we hear from Chairwoman Watts?
Whatever. A question from tax. My question is, normally these types of credits where we have a ceiling are not on the individual income tax. This is gonna be many, many individual income taxpayers. How will that be administered?
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Watts, that would be, this would be subject to a $1 million cap, so to the extent it'll be a prorated tax credit, so if $10 million worth of credits are claimed by taxpayers, then each taxpayer will get 10% of the amount that they applied for.
A follow-up question if I could. So that I understand, but how is that actually administered? I filed my taxes in February, somebody else did theirs in April, and I'm assuming that I get my full amount or any portion thereof. What's going to happen as far as my actual tax filing?
Madam Chair, so generally for tax credits, we have an application process when they're capped. So we might have a deadline of March 1st for this one. It just depends on volume and such, because we have at least 15 to 20 tax credits that are capped. So taxpayers will apply by that deadline, and then we'll look at and make sure all the claims are legitimate, and then allocate or determine how much each taxpayer is going to get based on proration. So in my example, each taxpayer might get 10% of what they claimed, or half of what they claimed, depending on how much in excess of the $1 million cap is claimed by taxpayers. And then we'll issue a letter to taxpayers, and then they can attach that to their tax return and claim the credit on their tax forms. Oftentimes the tax credits are, the timing ends up that they have to file an amended return after the May 1st individual deadline or the April 15th corporate deadline, because just the volume, we can't process all the applications in time.
So it's an amended return after, an
Oftentimes.
application and an amended return that have to go with this.
Oftentimes, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Corey was up, and then Delegate Fire, and then we'll go to Corey.
Senator Reeves, I guess this is a two-part question. Do you know why there's a cap and how that figure became attached to the cap?
Yes, ma'am. I tried to bring this bill before, and they couldn't anticipate how many teachers, if we took every teacher in the Commonwealth to do it, it was gonna be millions upon millions upon millions of dollars, and that was the challenge. So we wanted to try to start small and see where we got, and if we wind up every teacher getting $25, and we know we got a bigger problem than we thought, we might have to look at maybe raising that amount in future days. So we're trying to take a small bite at the apple, kind of as a testing ground, and see where we go from there.
Delegate Corey, any other questions?
Yes.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry about that. Is this something that tax already does? Thank you. Is this procedure of figuring out the cap and the percentage, et cetera, is that something you already do with other tax credits?
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Corey, yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
All right, Delegate Fire.
So, I was trying to think through this, because actually, I mean, it's something that's very much needed by the teachers. I have a couple kids that teach too, so I understand the value of this. But, so when is the deadline? How does the credits work? Like, they have a certain amount of time and then they all have to wait? Is it additional paperwork? Is it simple for them to do? Can you just give me a quick 101?
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Byron, it really depends. This seems like it's a fairly simplistic tax credit, so I imagine there will be additional paperwork because you have to fill out the application for the credit. But I don't anticipate this would be one of our more complex ones, like the R&D tax credit, for instance, where it's extensive paperwork. So, as for the timing, I don't know exactly when the credit deadline would be, but typically, it's sometime. The reason we have to wait till after the new year is because you could incur these expenses up to December 31st of the taxable year for which you're filing for. Like in 2019, you're filing, or in 2020, you're filing your 2020, or let me start over. Sorry, in 2020, you're filing your return for taxable year 2019 by May 1st. So you could incur those expenses up to December 31st. That gives you some time to figure out when how much you've incurred and such, and then it's kind of a timing issue, I guess.
Sure. It's only limited to $250 a teacher, so it's not.
Delegate Ware had a question, Delegate Scott, and then Delegate Ayala.
Again, this is for tax. We currently have a deduction. As I recall, it was Senator or Delegate Black who brought that bill some years ago. Could you explain just briefly the relative value to each teacher of a deduction which is currently in code as compared to the credit which is contemplated?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, Delegate Ware. So deductions are, so you have your amount of taxable income. You reduce your amount of Virginia taxable income by a deduction or subtraction, and then you calculate your tax liability times 5.75% at the most. So a tax credit is or a subtraction or deduction is really worth 5.75% of whatever the amount of the subtraction is. So if it's a $100 subtraction, you're really reducing your tax liability by about $5.75 at the most. A tax credit comes after you calculate your tax liability. So if you have a after-tax liability of $100 and you have a credit of $100, that will totally wipe out your tax liability. So credits are always more valuable.
Thank you.
So the taxpayer credit's more valuable.
Well,
yes. Delegate Scott had a question?
My
Are you
question
sure?
got
And then
answered.
Delegate Ayala had a question.
Was this, I remember bringing up a bill on behalf of the Virginia Education Association that was similar last year, did not pass because of the way it was constructed. Is this that same, is this supported by the VEA?
I haven't run it by them. I've carried this bill twice, but I've never, because of the financial impact, been able to get it out of the Senate. But because we're limiting the amount of, the pot of money, we were able to look at it and get it out. So I don't believe I ever saw your bill.
Sure. Cool. So let's hear from the public, and we do have 3 more bills we have to get through. So any members of the public that wishes to speak in favor of Senator Reeves' bill? Anybody who wishes to speak against Senator Reeves' bill? If not, so this is one of the, as you heard from one of the questions, because this is a fairly new issue, and it is a significant departure from our current process of deductions. And there's a cap. We're not quite sure exactly how the cap's going to work in terms of the total amount of people that will apply. I think this is one that I personally feel more comfortable sending to appropriations, and I just checked with our chair, and I believe this is one that appropriations would like to see as well. So if there was to be a motion, they report it before.
Can we move the clause first?
Oh, there's a clause on this? Oh,
Yeah.
I should assume that everything does. So yes, Delegate Scott moves to remove the Senate clause. Seconded. So all in favor of removing the Senate clause, say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. If not, and then the motion was Delegate, that's right, Delegate report and refer with the amendment, and that was probably seconded. So the.
Sorry.
Technically, it's re-refer since it was referred to finance first. So report and to re-refer to with the amendment on the board, please.
Thank you.
There we go. And all those using the vote have voted. The vote. Oh, yeah.
I know, mine
She's
was like it.
Call for close the roll. The Senate Bill 500 reports and refers to appropriation with the amendment. Good luck, Senator. Okay, we're gonna go to, I believe, Senator Barker is behind us. So there's Senator Barker, and then if the other patrons are not here, we're gonna take care of the other bills because they're identical, similar to process.
Yeah.
Senator Barker.
Sure, members of the subcommittee, I have Senate Bill 277, which provides a tax benefit, tax reduction for businesses related to commuter benefits. You, I think, had a similar bill. I think your chair had carried the bill here. My bill does have the clause from the Senate.
Gently lay on it.
Just keep it closed. So.
Y'all like clauses over there, huh?
We do, so.
So, Senator Barker, before we proceed, if it wasn't for the clause, would the rest of the bill be identical? Council or something confirm? The other bill we're talking about is House Bill 1555,
right,
introduced by Chairwoman Watts,
right,
which unfortunately was left in appropriations. So,
Mr. Chairman, the only difference between the two was really that as engrossed, Senator Barker's bill does have a sunset of January 1st, 2025.
Oh.
House Bill 1555 did not have that sunset.
Okay, so there was a sense of that in this, okay.
Yeah, this bill was put in because of changes that were made at the federal level with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, passed in December 2017. What it did was it kept the employee deduction but eliminated the business deduction so that the corporations that are providing these benefits to their employees would no longer get that. When we conformed last year with the federal legislation, basically that got rolled in as part of that, which is why that it went away for the business sector.
Madam Chair.
Then I would say that given that the 2025 is when the federal
Right.
is due to sunset,
That's why-
I am
that's why we-
comfortable with that sunset.
Yeah, we did that sunset because the federal legislation basically had that 6-year time frame.
So do we need to conform the House bill
Well,
to Senate bill or just pass Senate bill?
well-
If we're so inclined.
Responding, Mr.
Yeah,
Chair, I would
that's
say that take off the clause, but as far as the sunset, I'm comfortable with staying with Senator Barker's version of the bill because mine did not have that sunset, which is the federal sunsetting.
Yeah, also because the House bill was left in appropriations, this is gonna go to appropriations anyway, so if there's conformity, then they'll work out the language there. So, let's hear from the members of the public, or actually from the tax department, any comments on this particular measure?
Mr. Chairman, no, not at this time.
Let's hear from the members of the public who wish to speak in favor of Senate Bill 277.
Hello, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm Caitlin Chikini with Virginia League of Conservation Voters, and we're supportive of this bill.
Morning, Lisa Guthrie, Virginia Transit Association. We thank Senator Barker for bringing this forward. We strongly support the bill. We think it's good for economic development incentives. Getting employees to work is very important. It's one of the largest barriers to employment, and so we think that this is a measure that will enable employees to get to work better, have more options, and it also makes us more competitive with our neighboring states such as Maryland and North Carolina who offer this, even offer tax credits. So anyway, this is another tool in our economic toolbox. Thank you.
She's priming us for next year.
And Danny Palmer with Virginia Enterprise Bureau, we also support this bill.
Thank you. Is there anybody in opposition to 277? Not, well, first we would remove the clause. So seconded by Delegate Ayala.
Yep, there you
All
go.
in favor of removing the Senate clause, say aye.
Aye.
All against? So the Senate Bill 277 as amended is before us.
Move to report and refer.
Is there a second there?
Second, to we refer.
So the Senate Bill 277 is moved to report with the amendment and re-refer to appropriations.
Minus
Clerk
the
will-
clause. No, I'm just
Yeah,
joking.
clerk will open the roll. Senate Bill 277 reports to me first on a vote of 5-4. And clerk will close the roll. Thank you, Senator Barker.
Thank you.
So we have two other measures in the patient's not here, but we can explain this really quickly because the other, unlike the other bills that we just heard, these two are bills that we have seen before, and I will, before we clarify, moving forward, I will just make sure that we remind the voters and this subcommittee of how they voted. Senate Bill 923 was introduced by Senator Lucas, is currently similar to Senator Aird's House Bill 1318 dealing with the motion picture production tax credit. You might recall that we had two bills this year on the motion pictures, Delegate Kilgore's and Delegate Aird's. This is closer to Delegate Aird. So first, I would like to conform the 923 to the House version, which is the version that you have voted.
So moved.
That way you'll feel more comfortable with that. So the vote to conform Senate Bill 923 to the House Bill 1318. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those against? All right. So with that, the vote that left the Finance Committee was 15-7, just to remind folks. And it would be identical at this stage, and so the bill, if it were to report, would be reported with the amended version, which is conforming. Do we have a motion?
Move to report.
All right.
Second.
Yeah, with
With
the
substitute, sorry.
So, Senate Bill 923 was moved to report with a substitute and seconded. So all those who wish to vote will cast their vote, and just a reminder, we need to remind you about the vote.
Yeah, we don't want Senator Lucas coming up like that.
Always great to see Senator Lucas.
Yeah, but not the
Senate Bill,
midterms.
Senate Bill 9, clerk will close the roll. Senate Bill 923 moves with the substitute to the floor. The next one is also in a similar posture. Senator Morrissey's Senate Bill 931. Right now, it's slightly different from Senator Delegate Cox's bill, which was about the Crime Stop rewards. That went through appropriations made out, and I think it passed. It's not unanimous, almost unanimous. Yeah. So I would first entertain a motion to conform Senate Bill 931 to House Bill 307. So those in favor say aye. Those opposed. So So the Senate Bill 931 as amended to conform to House Bill 307 is before us. And
I'm sorry, I thought I
amendment. Do we want to act on Senate Bill 931?
Is it Senate Bill 931 or HB 307 now?
House Bill is dead now, so we'll pass crossover. So we're only dealing with Senate bills. Well, not dead, but I mean, pass out of it. So what's before us is Senate Bill 931, that's now identical to House Bill 307. So it's moved and seconded. Those who wish to vote will cast the vote on the voting machine. And then after this, I have one more procedural matter.
I thought y'all were still talking it over there, so I didn't follow the
Senate Bill
conversation.
931, corporate close the roll, passes with an amendment on a vote of 8-0. Now, the last measure was, the first bill that we took up earlier this morning, which was Senate Bill 1058, Senator Lewis' bill, which is, started out identical to my bill. What I forgot to do two things, because it was literally the first thing that we did. For one, I realized we passed it with the Senate clause, which we shouldn't have.
Oops.
Secondly, it should have gone to appropriations, because this is one where we narrowed the language down significantly from where I started out. My bill ended up in appropriations, or it would have been ended up in appropriations as well. So I'm going to ask if there's a motion to bring this back here.
By which we adopted and recommend your reporting for, I move that we reconsider that motion.
Second. Those in favor of reconsidering, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. So Senate Bill 1058 is properly before us again, so I'd like to have two motions. One is to remove the Senate clause, which we accidentally missed. So those in favor of removing the Senate clause will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay. And remember, there was a substitute which was accepted. The substitute included the clause, which is why we forgot to do the second step. So now that the substitute is properly before us, I'd like to move,
So moved.
report and to re-refer this to appropriations.
So moved.
So it's seconded, and the clerk will open the roll for Senate Bill 1058 to be reported and re-referred to appropriation with a substitute. Substitute minus a clause. And that'll be good. All right, so that does that. The clerk will close the roll, Senate Bill 1058, re-reports. And I'll make sure that Senator Lewis understands that that's what we were meant to do originally. I think that wraps up the agenda.
job, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. We may have one more meeting depending on what else comes over from the Senate that we haven't seen yet, but if not, we will see you on Wednesday at the finance meeting. Thank you all.
Is it full committee tonight?
Today?
No.
No. There's no full committee. No, we switched, remember? We switched from Wednesday to Monday.